And it came to light when my oldest daughter she was 14 and we lived in a very nice area and big house and all the different trappings of wealth that came with that. Her little girlfriends are in the car and they're talking about their BMW or their Porsche they're going to get when they turn 16. And my daughter says, Dad, what kind of car am I going to get when I turn 16? And I said, whatever kind of car you can afford.
Mhm.
And she said, well, what? And I said, well, yeah. I said, so this is the deal. I said, you're going to buy your car. I will help you out a little bit, but there's some rules to that. And she says, but we're rich. And I said, oh, no, honey, I'm rich. You're poor.
Imagine building a successful business only to find out that with each new milestone, you are exposed to more risk, more complexity, and more sleepless nights. What if there were a better way, a simpler way to grow, protect, and sustain what you've built? Today's guest has spent over 35 years helping founders do just that. Dr. Thomas J. Powell is an entrepreneur, international financier, and legal strategist who believes that when you find a better way, you share it. From raising and structuring over $3.2 billion in capital to helping business owners navigate legal and financial landmines, Tom brings clarity where others bring confusion. He is not just about success, he is about building success that lasts. If you are looking to scale your vision, simplify your path forward, and create a legacy that you can be proud of, you're about to discover how. Please welcome Dr. Thomas J. Powell. Skier Tom, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely, Matt. Happy to be here.
You are an enigma. You are somebody who I've seen in the group and I've wanted to talk to, but you just seem so far out there that you seem untouchable. So I'm really glad to be able to connect with you. And so my first question is, you spend 100 days on the ski slopes. Tell me about that.
On a bad year, yeah. So I live on a ski slope to begin with. So I live in Lake Tahoe area, and I am what's called a certified ski instructor and also part of the USSA, which is our professional ski association for our race teams, and a coach in that. And I essentially coach coaches. So I don't, I coach skiers as well, and snowboarders, but I really coach the coaches to how to coach. And
Wow.
so with that, I grew up in Lake Tahoe area and traveled around the world, and I still travel. I make much of my travel about, if we can, about skiing at different times.
Uh-huh.
And the great thing is being in business, we call them board meetings. And legitimately, I've done a lot of business, hundreds of millions of dollars of business on ski slopes.
Well, that's amazing. I want to get into your story and your background and kind of this private equity thing in just a few minutes. But whenever I think of private equity, I think of like private, like don't look at it, don't talk about it. So what I would like to do as we go through this is talk about making private public and making the invisible visible. But again, we'll get back to that in just a few minutes. I want to start with your background. How did you get into entrepreneurship?
Necessity. I grew up, my parents were out of my life pretty early. So I moved in with my older sisters who were not that much older than me. I was 12, and the place that I was living in was the place between the house and the garage. So it was a two-bedroom house with a single car garage in northern Nevada where it snows, much, and it used to snow a lot more. And that place between the garage is called a breezeway, and they threw up two walls and a little roof on it so that they could do the washing machine in there. And that was my bedroom. So hard floor, no heat. And so the house was heated by oil, and we didn't have enough heat. Generally, we didn't have enough money for oil heat all month long. So at 12, you really can't produce much income. But I started shoveling sidewalks, taking care of people's pets, and then found a friend who had a lawnmower. So I made him a business partner, and we started mowing lawns. And we actually named the business at that time Macau, and it stood for Millions Are Coming Our Way, because I had a vision. I knew that was not going to be my destiny scenario of being impoverished for all of my life. And so that's the way I got started. By high school, I had a number of football players that were on my company payroll. I had opened a payroll account before I was even 14, which you couldn't do today. And I was making more than teachers in high school with my company. So that took me out of school very early and barely graduated high school, as my sister would tell you. She didn't think I was going to graduate. She was actually showing up to graduation to see if I graduated high school, which was fun.
So can I ask what happened to your parents?
My mom had struggled with mental illness, and my father and she had divorced pretty early on. And so he was in the universe and he circled around at different times. Great guy, friendly. Everybody loved him. He just was not a father parental figure. He was a friend scenario, but not economically providing, not house stability providing. But he was there, just not in the house, and he wasn't part of my life from that standpoint.
Hmm. Do you think that the pain of going through whatever you did with that caused you to have the rocket fuel to get where you are today?
I don't know. It's the funny thing is that as I've grown older, and I have a lot of siblings, I have seven older sisters and an older brother, and we're not all close, but three or four of them and I are really close. And a couple of them I'm really close with. So it was interesting that a number of years ago I'm sitting there with my older sisters and we're having a conversation. And slow learner. I think you've heard me talk about being a strategic coach. Been a strategic coach 25 years. I'm Dan Sullivan's like ideal customer. I'm a slow learner with cash flow, right?
Mhm.
So I didn't even realize that what I was going through was negative in any way. It didn't resonate with me. There wasn't anything positive or negative about it. It was just the experience. And this isn't me looking back now at, almost 60, going back and processing it with my brain here. I didn't even realize that it was a situation that you kids shouldn't be in until I was probably in my 30s. It's like I
Hmm.
knew that I didn't want my kids to go through that. I knew I was going to be in my kids' lives no matter what and be a provider with my kids no matter what. But I didn't see it. I wasn't in a judgmental space about it, and still not really
Hmm.
overly judgmental about it.
It just was what it was.
It just was. Yeah, it just was what it was. And so it was looking around. And I will tell you that, so I was fortunate. One of the many great fortunes was the mentors that came into my life because of that. So I was hungry. And I think hungry is an important part of being a good entrepreneur at times. Maybe it's hungry for knowledge. It doesn't have to be necessarily literally hungry, but we were hungry and cold. And so that gave the opportunity of a necessity. And some people just get crushed underneath the weight of that. I know it. And other people are looking at that and say, no, I'm going to thrive. And they build the skill sets and they implement and learn different things. I still think it takes the mentors. It's not just the drive. So the kids that I was friends with, they didn't even necessarily know how poor we were. Their parents probably figured it out. And today I probably would have been taken by social services,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So, but that wasn't that time. This is the 70s and it's just is what it is. And the parents were casino owners, names of casinos that still stand today, that their names are there, that, corporations own them, but they're, like Hera and others. And so I'm growing up in this area that has extremely wealthy families. And for the most part, many of those kids ended up being drug addicted. I kind of joke about one of them is, he lost $400 million to hookers and blow. And many of them died, over time. And in my case, I didn't get into any of that because I was so busy trying to make money and trying to build something and have a family pretty young that seeing those other mentors, they looked down and helped me. So it's a very long list of mentors. And I was an eager learner. I still am. And I'm curious beyond, belief, probably with, a lot of negative outcomes because of it. But it was a positive thing. So, I would not be where I am had I started out differently. I oftentimes would say, oh boy, if I had started, as Joe says, if some people start on third base and think they hit a triple, I
Yep.
did not start on third base, but I'm glad I didn't in certain ways.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting conversation with some of our other guests. This idea that if you build it, you respect it, you get stronger. It's like if somebody all of a sudden put pec implants in, you didn't do the work, but you look good, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you get stronger, then you're capable of dealing with the wealth. And I think that happens a lot of times in second and third generation wealth is that they don't know what to do with it and they really have no purpose.
That's been a struggle because I made money pretty early on. The fast story was I did decide finally that I needed to go to school. So I'm starting to go to school down in the Bay Area, and I'd been running 5 retail stores for a company called Foot Locker. which that's a whole another luck story. I had my oldest daughter when I was just turning 21. So, and she's turning 38 this year. So, young parent in the Bay Area running all these retail stores, and Wells Fargo was struggling because they'd just gone through deregulation. All banks did. And McKinsey said you should find retail sales managers to come run branches because you have to compete. So they first hired salespeople, and banking and sales at the time did not meld because they were totally different personalities. And so they've got all these salespeople, and the managers don't know how to manage the salespeople. So McKinsey said, hey, great idea. Go get people that manage salespeople, which I had 5 stores. And so while I'm going to college, I get this knock on the door and says, hey, we'd like to hire you to come run a branch for Wells Fargo. And of course, they thought I was much older than I was because my resume was already super long of time and stuff. And I got this opportunity. So in my early 20s, I was a very young, very successful vice president with a bank, which sounds like a boring ass job, but it was at a transition time. If you read Good to Great, Jim Collins writes about that time at Wells Fargo with Carl Reichardt as the CEO. And I was one of those people I'm not specifically named in the book, but that's the driving force of what goes on in there. And so I was fortunate. I made a lot of money in banking really early on, like what an investment banker makes, right? In retail banking. And it was like, this is impossible type scenario, but it did. What that did for me is it started me down the pathway of finding other wealthy people and having the friends that grew up in wealthy families and becoming drug addicts or second or third generation losing that money to saying, that's not what I want. How do I set up systems and structures so that my kids don't have that challenge? Because I don't want to gift them a problem if I can help that. I want to gift them challenges and opportunity to grow, but I don't want to gift them something that's going to handicap them in the future. And it came to light when my oldest daughter, she doesn't like this story very much, but it's a funny story for me, is she was 14 and we lived in a very nice area and big house and all the different trappings of wealth that came with that. And she said, her little girlfriends are in the car and they're talking about their BMW or their Porsche they're going to get when they turn 16. And my daughter says, Dad, what kind of car am I going to get when I turn 16? And I said, whatever kind of car you can afford. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, what? And I said, well, yeah. I said, so this is the deal. I said, you're going to buy your car. I will help you out a little bit, but there's some rules to that. And she says, but we're rich. And I said, oh, no, honey, I'm rich. You're poor. And it set the conversations that she and I have now 24 years later still. And I watch even how she and Steve are raising my grandchildren and such. Mm-hmm. They make sure that it's very clear that the wealth comes from the connections and the family and all the other things that are out of that. But the money is very non-transferable, meaning it is going to stay in trusts and such to give people opportunity, but it doesn't get dispersed. And that was a decision that we made early, and it's become the basis of what my life is and even the work that we do.
I think that's a great concept because I know that as my wife and I, we went from the employee quadrant to the business owner quadrant, and we started having more money. You can use that as a crutch to say, no, you can't have that because we can't afford it. But then when your children know, no, we can totally afford that. How do you do that? And it sounds like you were principled enough to say, no, you're not going to have that because those are not our rules. Did you have a framework of like actual rules that you maybe wrote down or that you used, or how did you get this concept?
It came over time. And first of all, it came with the first time we did a trust. And so looking at that, and what I wanted to decide was the trust was designed not how to transfer wealth, but how to transfer me into the future if I was to die while my kids were still young. Now, the challenge with that is it's had to change and evolve over time, and I didn't have to, but it became more valuable with life experiences and things that I've gone through and understanding challenges that people do go through and how do you want to help and show up for those things. But it's still fundamentally pretty much the same way. And the very basics are, and now it's no longer in a, revocable trust. It's all set up through an irrevocable trust and a whole bunch of other complexities that are within there with charitable remainder trusts, and the wealth became a lot bigger. So that gave one an opportunity to have a lot more legal advice and accounting advice and own intellect, and also watching other people that have successfully done it, because there are families that transfer wealth and ideas well, and there are many that don't. And there are many that really destroy their children through wealth or any
Hmm.
other. Money is very much like alcohol. It makes a nice person nicer and it makes a mean person meaner. So you hear that mean drunk scenario. They're mean even if they tend to be nice, type scenario, but they're still a mean person underneath that if they're a mean drunk. And money's the same way. I watch that. If they use it as a power play, and by power play, I don't mean that, Joe, we're both ingenious. Joe will talk about if you, or I think it actually comes from Dan Sullivan. If you have money, if a problem can be solved by money, it's not a real problem, right?
Right.
Especially if you have money type scenario, because that's true, right? There's other problems that you can't solve with money,
Yep.
but money itself can be a problem. It's just how do you structure that? So to answer your question, the real basis was a lot of studying, a lot of reading, and a lot of putting stuff down and saying, no, that doesn't work, that does fit, and being flexible enough to change it. And that's been over time. And then listening and watching, we still adjust it at
Mhm.
times.
Yeah. I want to go back to your mentors. You had mentors in the early days. It sounds like you still have some mentors today. How are these people? How did they help you back then? What was some of the early advice that they gave you? And who, or you don't need to name names necessarily, but how are your mentors shaping who you are today?
Well, I will tell you that the funny part now is mentors used to always be older than me. They're not. Now, a lot of times my mentors are actually younger than me. And it changed somewhere in that because, again, I was the youngest person in the room for so many years. And then all of a sudden I wasn't. And then all of a sudden I'm the gray haired guy in the room. Right. So, and it's like, wow, this is really fascinating how fast it changed. So I would count Joe Polish as a mentor right now. And I'm working with Dre and Gary Sanchez and I are still, we're in the same age bracket, but it's great to work with him. One of my mentors back from the 80s is a guy named Bill Fisher. He's the one that actually hired me at Wells Fargo Bank for the position that I ended up getting. And he and I are still in business together all these years later because he started a company called Get Smart, which was kind of the precursor to what is Lending Tree. And so that led us into that whole fintech scenario. But he was a great mentor of mine in the 80s and fortunate to still do work with him today. A number of my mentors have passed away because they were older guys and gals. But the new ones, even Joel Weldon, not even Joel Weldon, especially Joel Weldon, so I seek them out. And, or if they seek me out and say, hey, I've got this idea, then it's learning from them. But there's mentors all over. And we end up being mentors, right? Which is also a fun thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge is that can't see inside of ourselves. We're inside looking out. And so you need the external view to say, step here, step there. Otherwise, you're just constantly the blind man tap trying to find the next step. And so if you have a coach or you have a mentor, the speed limit's a little faster to get where you want to go.
Yeah, I don't know when it changed in my life, but it changed dramatically of implementing the who, not how. Before Dan Sullivan, before that came out, before the dean came up with the term and then it got implemented and Ben with his book and all that scenario, that became my life because I was able to recognize at least that I didn't know much, but somebody knew way more than me about any subject that I wanted to know. And so that became also my pursuit of formal education. So I did end up, even though I barely graduated high school, I do end up having 5 advanced degrees, which is ridiculous. And one of them's, a doctorate and a law degree and MBA and went to Harvard. And I mean, all the things that are absolutely ridiculous. And when you look at it on a resume, you're like, oh my God, this is crazy, especially for a kid who barely graduated high school and for an entrepreneur, because many of our entrepreneur friends, they go to college, they start maybe in college, but they don't complete college. And so it's not about the formal education. All of them, almost every single one of them that I know, have amazing knowledge and experience. And they may not have gone to formal college, but they have that education. So, anyway, I don't know where we're going on that, but the need to be able to grow and have that forever is led by mentors. And what that led me into was, I don't know, 8 years ago, said, I really need to do better at going to yoga. And when it's 6 a.m. and I have to go to the yoga studio, too many days, I'll be like, no, it's a nice day. I'm going to go out for a hike. I'm not going to go
Hmm.
stand in the studio. So I made the decision that knowing that yoga and the stretching of the body and the movement of the body and the breath work and all of that is critically important, said I need to have someone that holds me accountable. And the way that's going to work is they show up at my house.
Oh, wow.
And so I searched and I found and I asked people and I said, I want a really good. So I found an amazing yoga person who understood fascia and movement of body. And it wasn't just going to be a set pattern. It was show up at my house. And it was great because during COVID, we had already been doing Zoom at times because I travel around the world and she travels with me on Zoom. But if I'm here, she comes to my house and it's great. So that does, it's like Jason doing the breath work. Sorry, in your thing, you'll have to put up all these people's names, but
Yeah, right.
you know who I'm talking about. You can find a coach for anything. I wanted to get better at swimming. I hired a triathlete coach to get me better at swimming. I want to get better at cycling. I am a coach in skiing. Anything that you want to do, there's somebody that can coach.
I think it was Jim Rohn or maybe Tony Robbins said success leaves clues. And there are people further ahead of you on this journey in life that will be happy to turn around and say, here's what I did. Here's how I got better at skiing or swimming or whatever it is. And I think so many people think that they have to know all of the answers, but they don't. They just have to know, I don't know this, and be humble enough to say, how can you help?
I totally agree with that. It is funny because one of my favorite people to ski with is a gentleman named Franz Klammer. And Franz Klammer won the 76 Olympics gold medal. He's one of the most famous downhill skiers in the world, if not the most famous downhill skier in the world. He's named Kaiser when you go anywhere in Europe and just a great guy, right? We're skiing with him. We've got another friend who's skiing with us, and he had won, I think, 26 World Cups that was skiing with us. His name's Andre. And Andre also is a fabulous coach. So I'm not a great skier. I'm a great coach. I'm a pretty good skier, but I mean, I really, because I have the eye, I can help somebody improve or I can see where a mistake is on that scenario in the skiing world. I'm a good skier, but I'm not at their level. Andre's giving all these tips and everything, and my wife is a phenomenal skier, and she's liking Andre. And he'll probably listen to this and be like, "Oh, I hurt his feelings." But she's liking Andre. It's fabulous to ski with him. But she's like, "Man, just it's too much talking. I just want to ski. I just came on this trip to go skiing, and I'm there to learn everything and be a sponge from Andre."
Mhm.
Franz looks over and he goes, "I don't know how to ski. I just ski. We ski." So this is the greatest guy in the world, right? And what he's saying is he doesn't coach. Now he does
Mhm.
coach. He actually does help people with their skiing and stuff. But Andre's a great coach type scenario.
Yeah,
And so you got to be careful of just because someone knows how to do it doesn't mean that they know how to teach how to do it.
absolutely. There's a huge distinction between doing and teaching. And I hate that phrase, those who can do and those who can't teach, because I've been a paramedic. I was very successful. I got really tired of it. And, I opened a paramedic school and I can do both. And I always could. But there are two different skill sets from being a paramedic and being a paramedic educator. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I think part of it
Absolutely.
goes to that conscious competence and unconscious competence and that whole Foursquare thing. You have to be competent to a certain level and then figure out why or what model you built in your brain to be able to explain it to somebody else and break it down so that it makes sense from their paradigm. Yeah.
I think that's powerful. You know that when I think, especially being in the healthcare arena, I think many of the people that you dealt with, or at least that I see, accidents do happen, but many of the things were preventable accidents or preventable life choices, right? So you get these people that are just in horrific health scenarios at a point in their life, and it's because of choices they made along. They knew what the right choices were.
Yep.
They didn't
Yeah.
make the right choices.
I could go on a deep dive in that, but I'll just say this. When I was a brand new paramedic, I had compassion for everybody because I felt like, oh, this poor person got themselves into this accident. But then after a while, I was like, wait, so for 40 or 50 years, you've been eating like crap. And now I have to lift you and carry you down 3 flights of stairs. And I'm going to break my back to try and help you when you could have just helped yourself.
Yep.
And I think it's a really powerful lesson for everybody. Like if you're someplace where you still can get up and get off the couch and put the potato chips away and start doing better, then take one step today. Whatever that is, do it because you need it. The world needs your gifts. And I could get on a soapbox and again go on this for a while, but the fact of the matter is that if you can, you should.
Well, you mentioned Jim Rohn. I agree. One of the things I loved about what Jim said was the Bible. It has all this, it has stories about what you should do. It also has warnings of what you shouldn't do. And I
Yep.
think most manuals should come with that, right? So, because it's a manual of life, and it's like, okay, look at this, and it can be the Quran, it can be whatever you want to go with it, the Torah. It doesn't matter. These are stories about people that have lived before us and said, hey, if you do this, like don't build your house on the sand in the summer, right? Real quick story scenario. And you're like, well, yeah, it's because somebody did build their house on the sand in the summer and it came along and then it was gone. It's like, oh, maybe we don't do that. Right. So I think that learning and finding the coaches is important, not to just find somebody who does it, but someone who observes how it was done and then can articulate it and ideally has systems and structure about how to duplicate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim Rohn said examples on one side, warnings on the other. So
I love that.
if somebody examines your life, let it be as an example, not as a warning, right? So I want to get into, you own a number of businesses. I don't even know how many businesses you're a part of, but let's talk about that and talk a little bit about private equity and what that is and kind of your business side and the entrepreneurial side of things.
So to be clear, I think when people say, we own well over 200 companies, part of that is that in most of those companies and different things that we have, we're not the operator, we're a principal.
Sure.
And we're generally a principal that has maybe not a majority share, but we have a controlling share, which is again gets into scenarios not about trying to be control freaks, but there's things that happen with investing in companies. So our methodology has generally been early stage investment. And so it's post friends and family money, and it's pre round A if they're going to do that, or institutional.
I'm gonna pause you just for a second. Some of our listeners may be kind of new entrepreneurs and not understand principle. And as soon as we encounter a word that we don't understand, all learning stops. So for somebody who thinks that the principal is just the head of their school and gets them in trouble, when you say that you're a principal in a business, tell us what that is.
So the operator of the business is usually the person who's showing up and doing the work every day. And early in my investment model, so again, coming out of Silicon Valley in the 80s, so this is where my career starts, right? So at the time, there were not really terms such as venture capitalist, hedge fund, private equity. We fit in all those boxes in our business model. So private equity is the one that, for better words, is probably the closest fit. Private banker is possibly another one. There's a number of different terms you could use. But the private equity side was about we come in and we're not just looking for the exit, we're part of the exit. We may be putting capital in to help them grow and have a cash flow stream. We may be coming in to systemize and structure. We may be providing them with opportunities where we'll take over some management structure that they don't really do well at. So that's where we sit in kind of that capital stack. We're a different creature in that in our venture capital model, we don't look to take over the company. If you watch many venture capital, they put the money in to the entrepreneur and the idea, but they tie it up so tightly that the moment that entrepreneur and entrepreneurs in the growth of a company generally have a pretty short life cycle. So they go to take that and get them out when the company idea is growing. Because at that point, then it becomes systemization of that idea and fund it up through whatever level it is that it exits. The Elon Musks and the Zuckerbergs of the world are not the normal stories of what happens with an entrepreneur and when it goes to grow to that point.
Yeah.
We think all small business owners are entrepreneurs. That's not true. And all entrepreneurs don't even necessarily own companies because there's entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs within companies at times. So it's generally the person who sees an idea and says, this can be better. And they take a resource that is not being maximized and they maximize it through some improvement, right? And that's where it's like, hey, I could become this person and make this a better scenario. So just being self-employed does not make you an entrepreneur. Uh,
Okay. So I'm going to pause again. We've introduced a lot of vocabulary here.
sorry.
And I think there's two groups of people listening to this. Some people who are dipping their toe into the entrepreneurial space, and then some people who can talk in the language that you're talking very easily. But I'm going to try and slow it down and break this down so that let's talk about a principal. That's somebody who's basically investing money. Let's say we have a lemonade stand and you're going to come and you're going to fund the lemonade stand, right? And so the person who starts the lemonade stand, they may need money for equipment and marketing and all of that. And so as this grows, what you're saying is that a venture capitalist usually will get out the person who normally has the idea to grow that lemonade stand. Is that a fair description?
It can be. It's not always that way, but it can be. So, what typically happens with an entrepreneur is they hit up against a ceiling of complexity. And some entrepreneurs will surround themselves with the people that help them get past and through that ceiling of complexity. And other entrepreneurs will continue to believe that they are the smartest person in the room. Because generally, one of the things about being an entrepreneur, one of the characteristics we often see is that they're very fast thinkers. They see
Mm-hmm.
things and they synthesize things that other people don't see. And so they don't understand why the other people don't see this. So when they're having conversations, they're moving through them. And the challenge is as you're growing a company, for the company to grow and employees to succeed within that company and then to become a repeatable process, you need systems and structure.
Yep.
Many entrepreneurs don't do well within systems and structure, and very few entrepreneurs can build systems and structure. So I think you've heard of a group called EOS.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So EOS talks about this, they get an implementer. So many of the entrepreneurs need implementers. So the
Yep.
entrepreneur comes up with these crazy ideas and then they start it. It's that spark to get it going, but they can't continue that because then they see the next spark that they need to start. And the team's sitting here going like, what the heck do we do? The business needs systems and structure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that explanation. That's spot on. I see it as thinkers and doers, and you need both, right? You need somebody to come up with the concept, like you said, the spark, but then you need somebody to keep the engine running, the doers, the operators. So, how are you using all of this type of framework in what you're doing? It seems like you're a very high level type person and you have the 10,000 foot view, or maybe even, from outer space, and you can see what needs to happen. Is that accurate? Is that how you are involved in all this, or how is that working?
I don't know where your shows are going to fall into this, but you and I were talking about Gary Sanchez and the Y Institute earlier.
Yep.
And, I think the work that Gary does is marvelous because it helps people find their why, but then how does that show up? So the what
Hmm.
and how type scenario. And his little 8-minute app clarified it, even though we've taken all these other personality profiles. I constantly am looking for a better way. And so when I see anything, and I knew this, I did find this out relatively early in my career that I could not start from a blank piece of paper.
Ah,
There are entrepreneurs that can absolutely start from a blank piece of paper.
yeah.
So I start from there's a drawing, and then I can look at the drawing and I can say, if you do this, the building will be more functional. So I can come in and make just about any process cleaner, faster, better scenario, but I need that initial group. And that's why I'm in the space I'm in to start something and come up with an idea. And then I'm a great person to brainstorm with, right? I can recognize a problem, but I won't know necessarily how to get it started to get fixed. But once we come up with that, then synthesize it in there.
I love that. My why is to contribute. And so I'm the guy who's cutting down the weeds and moving everything forward. And I don't mind being the tip of the spear to get things going. My challenge is that I can make a dirt road and it's going to be muddy and have potholes and it may be going like this. But my weakness is closing the loop, right? I need people to come behind me like you and say, hey, Matt, you've got a great idea here. Let me take it and make it better. And that's, I think, for a husband and wife team, to have that is great, and that's why we've done well. But I know in my life, I need more people like you to help improve the road.
Yeah. And I will be clear on that. I'm not the implementer. My team will tell you that. Right.
Ah,
That's partly why I can have so many companies because one, I do have a quick brain that can synthesize a whole bunch of different things and I can see relationships where many people don't see an inner relationship. The book, The Starfish and the Spider, have you read that book? It came
I've
out,
downloaded
15
it.
years
I've
ago.
I've, I've heard of it. It's on my book list. I probably have a sample of it.
One of the things I love about that book, and it's a little bit older book now, but it talks about a catalyst and a champion. And so, in many cases, in very rare cases, am I the champion for a cause. What I am is I back champions.
Hey, real quick, We're building a community of entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. These are people just like you who want to start or grow their businesses and are ready to take the next step. If that sounds like something you want to be a part of, sign up and join us today.
And so I'm a catalyst. So when a champion is doing something, I know somebody who can help that champion get further in what they're doing. Or when there's a cause, I can look around and say, this person would be possibly a great champion to go into there. So it's a skill set that's different. I'm not the one that's going to necessarily come behind and say, here's, and get the road better. But what I would do is come back and say, gosh, if we use some of the aggregate from our mine over here in Nevada and we ground that up and put it onto the road, now all of a sudden you won't have potholes when it rains. That would be the synthesizing of other ideas.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so then you're basically the one telling other people, hey, bring in the aggregate and fill them.
Yeah. Or more so, a lot of times what we do is we say, I know an aggregate guy or gal, and make the introduction and hand that off to you.
That's great. Let's say that you've been doing this for a long time. I think it's since 1988, since you were 12. Is that about right?
Well, 88, I was 23, I guess, 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe even longer then.
Yeah.
If you had to start over today with $500 and a beat up laptop, what would you do to build a $1 million business in 1 year?
That's a great question. In today's world, I would learn absolutely everything about AI.
Why do you say
I
that?
would also probably learn everything I possibly could about blockchain. Now, by blockchain, I don't mean crypto. I mean blockchain. So it's the engine behind crypto, right? So just understanding those two simple concepts. So I wrote my first code on a 512K computer. So that was 512K when we talk about gigabytes and, terabytes today on our memory and much larger than that. And it was a green screen. It wasn't even DOS at the time. So we're talking again the 70s. That there is really nothing faster right now than that. The other side is I would, if let's say that's just not your interest, I would do something that can't be done by AI or blockchain. So case in point, the trades and the management of trades are going to be ever more important. And if the whole grid ever goes down and the people that can build stuff, that's going to be crazy valuable. And so learning that, we're surrounded by, because we've been in real estate investment for a long time, we're surrounded by people that I have watched up where they started with a pickup and now they have a fleet and they have an army of team members that work for them. And many of them are immigrants that they have continued to bring into the country that are doing the work. And then all of a sudden they're just doing wonderfully well. And so that's a great area to be. The entrepreneur, again, the mindset is going to be finding where there's a need and finding a way that you can fill it.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep seeing nearly every day, I see another industry that AI is going to take out, and there's not going to be a need for people in that. But I think the trades are going to be probably one of the last ones to be affected. For example, they're building a building here on campus, and there's 16 to 20 guys out there at least. It's going to be a while before you can have robots building buildings to that scale as fast as they're building this building. Micro and the stuff he's doing, amazing. And if you're an employee working in the trades, figure out how to take that and make it to the B quadrant and make it into a business.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I would say that, again, to speed it up, if you can understand, because you said I had a laptop, and if I could go into chat or whatever else scenario, even if it wasn't my natural progression, learning certain questions to ask will also save you painful lessons, such as, if you're starting off and you don't even know what to start with, you could say, hey, chat. And by the way, my chat is named Charles. So I actually talked to it in the morning. I start up and I said, hey, Charles, and it goes, hey, Dr. Powell, how's it going? And what are we working on today? And I'll tell it my priorities. And it's like, that sounds great. Right. And help me keep that out and shoot off an email to my team to say, these are my priorities for the day that, yes, I could do, but it even comes out even faster now. So in the trades, if I was looking at that, I'd be looking at it and saying, okay, Who should I be looking at? Who should I be benchmarking? I can't see things that are outside of Truckee, California. What's going on in the world? All of that can add value because, again, the entrepreneur is going to be the person who sees something that others don't see.
One of the pieces of advice that I learned from a fellow member was the idea of, let's say I want to do this, chat, ask me one question at a time in order to achieve this. And so that was one of the best things I've learned. What other prompts would you have somebody ask Chat GPT if they wanted to get ahead, business plans, or whatever other fun things have you learned how to do?
Well, I think it's not specifically for me because I was in good fortune that over time I became a much better writer and had a better use of the English language and such. And Jim Rohn, and again, we keep talking about Jim Rohn. It's very rare that I get to talk to somebody who actually even knows who Jim Rohn is. They think
Oh,
he's a sportscaster. It's
no.
just, Earl Nightingale, Jim Rohn, all of these people I count as mentors. And I actually knew Jim. So
Oh,
that I felt very fortunate spending a lot of time with Jim. Writing and vocabulary is important. And Rohn mentions this in one of his stories that, there's a study, and I have not been able to find the study. He said it's a Harvard study, but I have not been able to find the specific study. And it's the study that they studied vocabulary and who generally had the least level of vocabulary and who had the most level of vocabulary. And I think a lot of people would think that the PhDs and the professors have the biggest vocabulary. And yes, if they are a linguist, that's probably true. But
mm,
as my father-in-law, who is a PhD, and all of the family, we have many doctorates in the family, he says a PhD is someone who knows an awful lot about very little. And
mm,
that's true because you go really deep on that subject, right? So it doesn't mean that you know a lot about vocabulary. But the group that had the biggest vocabulary was CEOs. And the group that had the lowest vocabulary were people in prison. Now, again, I haven't seen the story, so I'm talking about a story that's third person and quoting Jim Rohn of saying that, but it totally makes sense because the way he explains it is the vocabulary becomes the vision of what you can see and what you can articulate. And so, one of the things that I think you could use chat to do is help you write better if you're not already a great writer. Don't use it as just a crutch, use it as a learning tool, but communication of how to say something better of if you go off the handle and just say stuff that makes people feel bad, maybe start pausing and saying, "Oh, could I, Matt? I got to tell you that I just we show up at how do I say that better?" Or this morning I walk out to my wife and I said something I didn't ask chat this yet, but maybe I will. I said, "So I'm dealing with a city attorney in one area and she's young." And I go to my wife. I said, "How do I communicate without being pedantic?" And she goes, "I don't think you can." So I'm like, well, that's probably true at times, but I want to. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a conscious effort to not, right? So
yeah.
that's where I'd probably use it because communication is probably one of those tools that people undervalue, but we value so much in Genius.
Yeah, yeah. I had a student one time who wrote me a scathing email. Everything he was mad at me for, he had done to himself. He wasn't taking 100% responsibility for his actions in his education. And I mean, it was terrible. And I took that letter and I put it into chat and I said, make this sound professional. And the thing was that completely changed the tone of it. And it was polite, respectful. And I mean, it wasn't going to change the outcome. He had chosen to withdraw from the program on his own. That's fine. But I have always remembered that before I write something that's going to live forever, to put it into chat. And, it's Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And sometimes,
I have a mistake that costs me tens of millions of dollars and reputation. And it was one sentence. And if I could go back and change that sentence, I might. I probably would. But it hurt a lot of people in different things. And it's one sentence. And the background of the story was I was getting deposed by the SEC, and they were talking about one of the funds that we had raised. And the attorney was not a young attorney, but he was immature and he was very lazy, very lazy. And he will go unnamed, but if you ever look up my stuff, you'd be able to see his name. So anyway, he's interviewing me and he's talking about our documents for this investment that we had made. And he said, "So tell me, I don't understand the math in here." And this was a true story. I'd said, well, our attorney that designed those documents was a calculus professor as well. So not only was he an attorney, he was a calculus professor. We're good friends. And he's one of the best at this type of investment. And when I went to him, I said, I want people who have fourth grade math capabilities to be able to understand the math. And we talk about it for a little bit. And he's like, so are you saying that I can't even do math that a fourth grader can do? And I said, I didn't say that. And I
Mm.
let it sit.
Wow.
That was someone who had a big hammer and an awful lot of ability to make my life miserable. And he got offended by that sentence. And talk about government overreach and all the various things. It's ended up in, Ninth Circuit Court, all of these different things that have happened that I did not need to suffer that. And I am the one that caused him to feel bad about that. So
Was this
I
in an email or a verbal?
no, this was a verbal exchange.
So you, yeah, again, it goes back to that kind of insulting people and trying not to insult them. I've made mistakes that have not cost me that amount of time, effort, and frustration, thankfully. But yeah, our words do have meaning.
Huge meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. We have just a few minutes left. I respect your time, and I know you've got an appointment after this. Do you want to talk more about that SEC case, or do you want to talk more about what you learned as a result of the communication flaws?
Neither people can look at the Ninth Circuit and see Powell versus SEC and learn more about that. I will tell you that government overreach has always been, it caused me to go get my doctorate in law and policy. So again, I'm growing up in the 70s and we're learning civics from the standpoint of, George Washington never told a lie and Abraham Lincoln and all these wonderful things about our court systems and that we believe that people are innocent until proven guilty. And when you get into the system, you find out that's not even remotely close to anything that actually goes on. And when you read about George Washington, you see all the flaws that he did have. He's a human, right?
Yep.
And all the wonderful things that he was also. But I would not have done the doctorate in law had I not had the conflict with the SEC. So as my wife and I even last night were chatting about it, it's like I am thankful for that learning lesson. It was very painful for me and my family and friends and investors and everybody else, but it did change my course. And I look at that and say, oh, that's a fundamental change in the area. So I think the lesson for that for your listeners is anybody that's coming on to the world, whether they're an entrepreneur or not, but look at those challenges as the opportunities to grow. And you can either back away and go back on the porch and say, I'm never getting off the porch again. Or as a friend of mine that I was skiing with in Austria and Italy earlier this year, a guy's fabulously wealthy. And he got wealthy on one basic trade or a handful of trades in his fund that he has. And he said, and so many other people got the timing wrong and they're bankrupt. And he goes, it's luck. Timing was with me on that one. And he's an immigrant, came over to the States at 7 years old. And he said, one of the things I love about it is, he says, if they took everything away from you, you'd start again. He goes, I know for myself, if they took everything away from me and all I could do is have a hot dog stand, pretty soon I'd have 5 hot dog stands. And then pretty soon I'd have the hot dog manufacturer. And I'd figure out how to continue to grow that because that's just innate of getting back off the porch. And so your listeners, really that tenacity, that ability, that resilience, do everything to protect the resilience. There is nothing more important. Dan Sullivan calls it your confidence. I think it's beyond confidence. It's resilience. And Viktor Frankl came up in conversations the last couple times at Genius. And I think if they've not read Man's Search for Meaning, it's a fabulous book because that does show, as you go through life in general, there's going to be challenges and how do you approach them? And anybody that looks like they were successful, Facebook and all these things, everybody shows up as their best person. LinkedIn, everybody shows up as their best person, never had any failure. My daughter won't hire anybody. They won't make it past the first interview if they haven't been bloodied. If they can't tell where they failed and they learn from it, we don't want to know about the successes. Successes are easy. They don't teach you anything. They're great. It may take a lot to get there, and it definitely takes a lot to get to be a World Cup champion. But if that person never had the failures, that's what they talk about. That's where they learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. You're a ski instructor. That means you've never fallen down, right?
Yeah. Yeah, except for the great one was I was going out on an exam here just a few weeks ago, right? And the snow was really sketchy and everything else. And my skis I just hit something, I'm not paying attention, and they go, and I'm in a like down on the ground wedge with my hips up like this. And I'm getting older and different things. The body doesn't quite move the same way. First of all, it was stupid. Right in front of the people who are taking the exam that I'm part of the exam team, right? And I can't hardly get up because I can't pop out of my skis. So, and I can't move them the way that they're leveraged underneath the snow and everything. And I'm like, and they're like freaking out, scared and laughing at the same time. And
Yeah.
so I'm just like, and the great thing is, for whatever reason, I have a personality that I don't get mad about that stuff. I just laugh. And it really is. It doesn't mean that I don't get mad at times, but that's the deal is to just be able to laugh at yourself because we do stupid stuff all the time. And some of us, like myself, we do really stupid stuff often.
I think the average person makes 18 to 20 mistakes per day. And some days I feel like an overachiever. I mean,
Yeah.
like when you're trying and trying and trying, you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable.
What a
It,
different way to run our school programs. You fail. And if you fail, you don't even go to the next grade. Science is about failing. You're trying new things. You're
yes.
looking for things that don't work. Research is about finding the things that don't work as much as the things that do work, right? And as we started with the stories of these are the things of not to do and to do, that means you got to
Mhm.
do the not to do's.
I would love that. A final exam to get out of high school or college, you have to fail something. That means you were trying that hard and what didn't work and what's the lesson? Because that's what you carry into the next chapter of your life. What's the
Absolutely.
lesson? Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, I know you got to go. Where can people learn more about you?
They can go to thomasjpowell.com. That's out there. The group that we're doing on, and I'll put this out there, and it's a relatively new startup for us. And I said, I don't do a lot of blank pieces of paper and do something from the beginning. So this is one of our startups. It's called the Founders Office, and it's Founders Office or founders-office.com. And what it is about is we are a family office, which is high net worth. We're a single family office, which means we only have one family and it's our family. So we don't have multiple families in that office. And so my son-in-law, Steve, who who's in Genius, said it one day, our back office of how we take care of businesses, our businesses, is actually a business. And so much so that another guy went out and started a business off of that, and he's done fabulously well, which is great. And I love that. I have a lot of entrepreneurs that we've helped, in knowledge or in money to launch. So, but Steve had that idea, and then Candace, my daughter, and my team is like, yeah, we're actually really good at this, and entrepreneurs need it. So it's coming along. People can get the snapshot, which if you have I'm going to leave it with this one, and this one's going to be one that you need to, at some point, we can go longer talk.
Sure.
We can, in under 10 minutes, show the risks of what most entrepreneurs think that they've set up that gets them out of risk. And almost always their attorneys and their accountants are not communicating, and the spouse knows nothing about. And just one simple test is if an entrepreneur, husband and wife, start an LLC, and they start that LLC together, and they're the two members in that LLC. One, they normally name themselves member manager instead of member, and then it's manager managed. So that's one of the risk factors because managers have certain protections that owners don't have. So
Ah,
you want to separate out the language between the two. But the bigger one is your CPA says that is a disregarded entity in terms of the SEC. As a small business person, you're like, yeah, you talk about language. I don't know what that means. That's okay. And so what ends up happening is it shows up on your tax returns as though you're a sole proprietor. Well,
mhm.
sole proprietor has no protections for you as a business owner. None, right? Everything that you own is at risk. Everything,
Right.
your house, your cars, everything, your spouse's income is at risk as a sole
Oof.
proprietor, right? So now what happens is with that LLC being a disregarded entity, the lawyer will tell you, no, you still have all the protections as the LLC. And as a person in law and a strategist in law, I'd say, okay, great. Let me get you, Matt, in front of a jury. And we're talking about that a patient died under your care. And yes, you've
Mm.
got this LLC that protects you. But the IRS says it's a disregarded entity. So are we going to believe your attorney or are we going to believe the IRS? And a jury is going to go, or even a judge is going to go, Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're going to not count having the LLC. That one simple thing can change for your entrepreneurs their protection of their assets. And so
It's like,
that's we can fix really quickly.
and they can get that information at the founder's
Yeah,
office.com.
they can reach that out there, and we can do a snapshot and work with you on that.
That's amazing. So it's like somebody's holding an umbrella. They think that there's actually fabric there keeping the rain off of them. And when the poop hits the fan and it actually starts coming down on you, there's no fabric there. It's just the wires and nothing's going to protect you.
Yeah, even better than that, I think that there's a funnel that's collecting the rain on the one back, and the litigating attorneys know that it's there.
Oh, wow.
And so they're looking at it and saying, yeah, you look dry. You're dry totally up front. Everything's good. But you know your whole back end is wet?
There's a lot of people selling these LLCs right now as the panacea, the utopian structure. So
yeah. And they would
yeah.
argue with me. And I've had plenty of attorneys that argue with me on that fact. I'm like, great, let's go to court and let's see how that works out for you, for your clients.
Yeah.
And by the way,
Yeah.
that's the other thing for your entrepreneurs. I'm sorry, we'll finish up on this one. As the entrepreneur with your advisors, and we call this the founder's isolation paradox. So we've actually named it, and you'll see more stuff in books and things coming out on it. The founder has, especially as they grow, so they get to $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million in revenue, they're sitting there, and at that point, they're surrounded by people that are supposedly their advisors. Everyone from their spouse, who is their advisor and helped them launch the company, to the executive team that they've brought in, to the attorneys and the accountants. Everybody's advising that, but they all have their own focus.
Yeah.
The entrepreneur is the only one who's synthesizing all of it, including the spouse. The spouse has all the risk that the entrepreneur has, but they're not even synthesizing everything in there. And so this scenario sits there and is a very unique piece. And what I remind people about, especially relative to their dealing with their attorneys, is that dealing with their attorneys, it's like being a part of a ham and egg breakfast. The attorney is the chicken. They're involved in the breakfast. You are the pig.
You contributed.
You're committed.
You're committed. Yeah.
So every idea they come up with, everything at the end of the day, their biggest risk is that you sue them for a malpractice scenario, which they have insurance for. And good luck suing the attorneys, right? So you've got to remember that's not discounting what the attorneys say. It's that we say you need to be the steward of your own healthcare. Don't just listen to your doctor. You need to be your healthcare advocate. You need to be your legal and accounting advocate too. And so that's where this founder's isolation paradox and understanding a snapshot and saying, okay, I can hand this to my spouse. I can hand this to my attorney, my accountant, my executive team. They can see kind of the whole matrix of how this is going through. And now we can make better decisions. But at the end of the day, the entrepreneur who's committed in that breakfast can see it.
Yeah, thank you. I love that analogy. That's great. It's always interesting to me that we hire a CPA, but yet we're still signing personally on our tax forms. It's like, wait, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, kind of along those lines. Anyway,
we can. It is. Yeah. As an employee, you take almost no risk.
Correct.
Okay? As the business owner, you take unlimited risk, and everybody wants to keep you on the chessboard. And I use, for those listeners of yours or viewers of yours, I use the Harry Potter chessboard as an example. Most people play chess where they're off the board and they're playing a chess and they move a piece, and that's okay. And Bobby Fischer, that game ends. Bobby Fischer lives to fight another day on the chessboard, right? He's not on the chessboard. In Harry Potter, they're on the chessboard. Well, every day an entrepreneur shows up at business, they're on the chessboard. The bank puts them on the chessboard. The government puts them on the chessboard. All of it. And so what we do at the founder's office is we guide the entrepreneurs to not be on the chessboard, because the entrepreneurs, that business is not the only business they'll probably ever start. So they've got to be able to survive through that and play many more chess games along the line.
I love that. That's a great analogy and so true. So true. Well, Tom, thank you so much for all your wisdom. This has been great. I look forward to having you on the podcast again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And good luck to all the listeners. It's a great life.
It can be a bit of a roller coaster, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I don't think you would either.
No, not at all.
Want more? Click below for extra resources in our podcast vault. We have show summaries, action plans, and information about coaching.